Greetings. I'd like to welcome you to HDI's webinar presentation of 5 Critical Support Center Best Practices. My name is Allison Rowe. I am the Director of Marketing for HDI, and I will be your moderator today. Today's presenter, Pat Albright, is Manager of HDI Support Center Services. The presentation will be about 30 minutes long. The phones will be muted during the presentations, but we will allow for Q&A at the end. As your moderator, I will be answering questions and chat during the webinar. However, those will be used during your GoToWebinar tool and not through the audio or phone portion of the service. At this time, I'd like to again welcome everyone, and I'd like to hand the presentation over to Pat.
Great. Thanks, Allison. As Allison mentioned, I'm Pat Albright with HDI, and I'm the Manager of Support Center Services. As she mentioned, today's webinar will be brief, so let's go ahead and get started right away. Here's the dilemma. Day to day, we're faced with just one thing after another. A typical day often includes things like this. Hey, Joe, I need a report of all the tickets where user reported getting this error. Oh, and by the way, can you give me all the data for the past 2 years? Hey, Julie, I need you to reforecast the budget. The president just asked me to cut 10% across the board, and I need you to figure out where you can cut 20%. And in your mind, you have a plan for today. Today, I'm going to work on, insert here, any number of things on your to-do list, but then reality hits. Hey, John, the newest worm is due to hit the streets tomorrow, and I need you to come to the security meeting this afternoon. But don't worry, it's only about 2 hours, and you can prepare your team tomorrow as soon as the meeting ends at about 4. So the end of the day comes, and you finally go home, late again, wondering, how can I and my support center be more effective and efficient? When am I going to find the time to make improvements? Well, whether you're a support center director, manager, supervisor, or analyst, I know that your work days can be crazy. As a former practitioner, I've walked a mile in your shoes, and I feel your pain. As a former consultant, I worked with more than 25 support centers in nearly every industry to develop and implement improvement initiatives to improve effectiveness and efficiency. And as an HDI certified auditor since 2003, and as the manager of HDI Support Center Services since 2007, I've conducted over 20 certification audits and maturity assessments for HDI clients, and I've seen just about everything from A to Z out there in the real world. The bottom line is, days like what I just described are not going to end. They are the life of a support manager. The good news is, you can reduce their impact and maximize effectiveness and efficiencies through following industry best practices. The HDI Support Center Standard, which was developed by HDI's International Certification Standards Committee, defines 68 best practices for support centers that are well worth taking a look at. For today's webcast, I've selected 5 best practices that can have significant value for support centers. By no means is this an all-inclusive list, so I encourage you to take a look at the HDI Support Center Standard after today's presentation. Let's go ahead and take a look at the 5 that I've selected for today. The 5 that I've selected for today's webcast are training plans, workforce management, knowledge management, escalation procedures, and quality monitoring. Now, as we go through each of these 5 best practices, I'd like you to identify where you fall within the maturity level for each. Maturity levels will go from 1 to 4. At 1, you've just started, and at 4, you're fully optimized. Just jot down a number on your end, and after we've reviewed each of the 5 best practices, I'll give you some averages of where other support centers fall, and you can compare yourself against them. Let's review each in detail now. The first best practice I've selected is training plans. At the first level of maturity, do you have a documented training plan? And not only for orientation training for new staff, but also for ongoing training for your existing staff. Do you have procedures in place to keep your training plan up to date? For instance, as a new release is deployed into your environment, are you triggered through the change management process to update your orientation training plan? You want to make sure the employee you hired 2 weeks from now actually gets that training, right? At the second level of maturity, are you allocating the necessary time and funding to achieve the training? It's one thing to have a plan and another thing to actually follow it. So in your staffing schedule, are you allowing for the time needed to provide training? If the training includes outside resources, have you budgeted the necessary funding for those? At the third level of maturity, do you have a skills inventory that identifies all the skills that your support center staff needs to have to provide the services that you offer? Have you prepared a gap analysis that identifies which of your staff have the required skills so that you can plan to provide training where needed? Your staff needs to have business skills, technical skills, and perhaps even certification to do their jobs efficiently and effectively. So it's great to provide training, but are you really providing the training that's needed? At the fourth level of maturity, are you matching your staff competencies to the skill requirements by providing training to close skill gaps? And are you measuring your actual performance? For instance, you might target 100 hours of training per analyst per year. So are you then tracking the amount of training that you actually provide and comparing that performance against your targets to make sure that you're matching your competencies? At the end of the presentation, I'll show you a sample template for this. Now, remember to jot down where you think you fall within this maturity level. And we'll move on to talking about some of the benefits of having a training plan. You'll bring your new hires up to speed more quickly. Support centers that have and follow a well-developed training plan get new hires on the phone more quickly, hands down. Those without a training plan tell me it takes 6 weeks or longer, in some cases even a few months, to make those support center staff productive. Those with a plan tell me they often have staff not only taking, but really handling calls on their own after as little as 2 weeks. A well-trained staff can resolve a greater number of incidents on first contact, so you'll increase your first contact resolution. And resolving more incidents on the first contact can reduce the cost per incident. Executive management sees this, of course, as a great addition to the bottom line. Resolving incidents on first contact, no doubt, can also increase customer satisfaction. As I travel throughout the country, I ask people all over the place, in airports, hotels, wherever I'm at, what they really want from their help desk. And overwhelmingly, people tell me they want the person who answers the phone to solve their issue. And when that happens, they're most satisfied. Finally, providing training that enables your staff to be efficient and effective can increase employee satisfaction, which can also reduce employee attrition and the cost of that attrition. We all know how much it costs to replace somebody when they leave. Let's move on to the next best practice I've selected for today, and that's workforce management. Are you really performing the workforce management function? At the first level of maturity, are you forecasting the staffing level you need to handle the expected work volume? Or are you simply hoping for the best with your budgeted headcount? You need to take into account not only historical data, but also your knowledge about what's coming up in the future in order to forecast the volume appropriately. At the second level of maturity, are you scheduling your staff in order to meet service level targets? Or are you just hoping for the best and explaining what happened when you don't meet them? Do you schedule your staff to be available during the busiest times of the day, during the busiest days of the week? At the third level of maturity, are you actually staffing and scheduling based on the output from a formal forecasting method? Even if you're not able to staff and schedule according to your calculations, it's still important to calculate what you do need so that you can let your management know that you might have a problem meeting your service level targets without having the forecasted resources. Maybe the answer is that you have to reduce your service level target. Whether you use Erlang C or a more sophisticated tool, you really need to have a process in place for using that tool. At the fourth level of maturity, are you incorporating the business-related peaks and valleys, again, based on both historical data and your knowledge about what's coming up, and are you staffing and scheduling accordingly throughout the year? You know about deployments or about particularly busy times of the year, right? For instance, I'm told by the auto and insurance industries that President's Day is the busiest day of the year because a lot of people buy cars and update their insurance that day. Are you ensuring that you have the maximum staff coverage during the busiest times of the year? Remember to jot down now where you fall within this maturity level, and we'll go ahead and talk about some of the benefits of doing workforce management. When you're appropriately optimizing your resources through workforce management, you can increase the utilization of your staff. Greater utilization means your staff can handle more, so you're increasing the support capacity of your support center. You're handling more incidents with the same number of staff, and yet you're not overburdening those staff because you're staffing and scheduling them appropriately. And overall, handling more reduces your cost per incident. We'll move on now to the third best practice I've selected for today, and that's knowledge management. At the first level of maturity, do you have a knowledge management system? And I'm not talking about 30 binders of printed documentation sitting on an analyst's desk that may or may not be updated. I'm talking about a searchable knowledge base that enables your staff to access information easily and quickly. And ideally, your knowledge management system is integrated with your service management system. At the second level of maturity, does your support staff actually use the knowledge management system as part of the incident handling workflow? Is the knowledge management system integrated into the standard workflow? And is the knowledge actually being used to resolve incidents? Using knowledge can help your analysts resolve more incidents at the first level and on the first contact. At the third level of maturity, does your support staff have the ability to contribute to the knowledge management system? Can they add new knowledge as they develop it? Your analysts are pretty smart. They get a call and they know or they figure out how to resolve it. Can they make that knowledge available to their coworkers? Can they identify updates to existing knowledge where they find something needs fixed? And can they go ahead and make those updates right away? At the fourth level of maturity, is some of the knowledge that's developed, knowledge that's appropriate to customers, actually made available to customers, for instance, through a self-help tool, thus enabling your customers to solve more incidents on their own. So at this point, go ahead and remember to jot down where you fall within this maturity, and we'll talk about some of the benefits. With knowledge management, you can improve your incident resolution time. We've worked with customers who have seen an improvement in incident resolution time by as much as 30 to 60%. When support analysts can reuse knowledge that they or others have created, it eliminates the need to spend time redoing what's already been done. The knowledge is there to help the analysts solve the incidents within a shorter period of time. Improving resolution time frees up analysts to handle more, so you're also increasing support capacity. We've worked with customers who've increased their capacity by 25% or more through implementing knowledge management. Clearly, you can improve your first contact resolution. When you make knowledge available to your staff to resolve incidents, you can resolve more at the first level and on the first contact. Knowledge becomes part of your training plan as well, which allows you to bring new hires up to speed and get them more productive a lot quicker. If you're creating and maintaining knowledge, you can also make some of that knowledge available to your customers to enable your web self-help tools. And a little side benefit is that by tracking the use of knowledge, you can identify which knowledge gets used the most and possibly identify recurring issues, submit them to your problem management team, who can do some investigation, root cause analysis, and perhaps even eliminate some of those issues. Not having to resolve recurring issues over and over again also increases your support capacity. We're going to move on now to the fourth best practice that I've identified to talk about today, and that is escalation procedures. At the first level of maturity, do you have clearly defined procedures for escalating incidents? Or are your analysts still running around in circles trying to figure out who can help and if that person's available? Do your procedures ensure that your incidents are passed along to the right group or person without delay when the support center can't resolve the issue? And if that person's not available, well, who's the backup? Who does the incident go to then? At the second level of maturity, is the ownership of the incident clearly defined in your escalation procedures? So who owns the follow-up? Does the escalation point resolve the issue directly with the customer, or do they provide the information back to your support center, who then communicates it back to the customer? At the third level of maturity, are all of your escalations performed according to the procedures? Or are you still one-offing some of them because it's not really clear in some areas? Are all of your support analysts properly trained? Or are some of the analysts not trained and perhaps not following the procedures? At the fourth level of maturity, do you update the procedures as changes occur in your support center environment? For instance, when a support partner changes, or perhaps someone leaves the organization, or as knowledge is passed to your support center to enable them to resolve issues without escalating, are your procedures updated accordingly so that future incidents are escalated or not escalated appropriately? Take a minute now to jot down where you fall within the maturity level for this activity now. And we'll talk about some of the benefits. I'm going to use a real-life example. One of our clients, a large telecommunications provider, shared with me that they were escalating incidents and service requests on a case-by-case basis, spending a lot of time trying to figure out who was responsible for supporting the technology or application that the incident was being reported about. After reviewing this activity of the HDI Support Center standard, they took the time to create an escalation database, including identification of backup partners. They did this first in Excel, and then they integrated it into their service management system. And they also documented the escalation procedures, and they trained their staff to understand and follow them. On completing that activity, they reported all of the benefits shown on this slide. Service consistency was greatly improved. The overall average resolution time was much reduced. Their employees were more satisfied. The support center staff were very happy not to be chasing their tails and running around trying to figure out who to escalate to, and they felt more confident letting the customer know that their incident was going to be solved. Finally, the customers reported greater satisfaction. They were happy that they received a professional response and that their incidents were resolved quicker and more consistently. Okay, we're going to move along to the fifth best practice that I've identified to talk about today, and that's quality monitoring. Quality monitoring is so critical for making sure that you can sustain consistency in service. At the first level of maturity, do you have a process in place for monitoring the quality of both your calls and your tickets? Whether you use a manual checklist or one of the really great tools that are now available, do you have a sustainable process in place for using that tool? And are you following it regularly to review calls and tickets for quality? At the second level of maturity, are you actually communicating the results to your staff on a timely basis? You're not just doing it and filing the forms away in a drawer to pull out at the end of the year. You're actually using the output of the process to improve staff performance throughout the year. You're providing coaching where needed, and you're also, of course, using it to recognize analysts for good work. At the third level of maturity, are you using some of that information in training? Are you using some of the real-life examples, anonymously, of course, during both your new hire and your ongoing training to help all of your analysts increase the quality of work and increase the consistency of work among analysts? At the fourth level of maturity, do you include the results of your quality monitoring in the performance appraisals at the end of the year? So at that point, you're actually incorporating quality monitoring measurements into the appraisals and encouraging performance, perhaps even linking compensation to that performance. So remember to jot down now where you fall within the maturity level for this practice, and we'll talk about some of the benefits. I'm going to use another real-life example here. I worked with a large bank a couple of years ago that was not monitoring the quality of calls and tickets. Their customer satisfaction surveys contained complaints about consistencies. Customers reported receiving better service from some analysts than others, and they were also receiving complaints from their level 2 technicians who reported some inconsistency in the information that was provided to them on escalated incidents. So they decided to implement a quality monitoring program of random reviews of call and ticket data. They followed those reviews up with immediate coaching and provided group training where they identified knowledge gaps. Overall, they saw an almost immediate reduction in complaints about consistency, and long-term, the customer satisfaction ratings were increased. They also received improved feedback from those level 2 escalation partners, which really improved the team atmosphere and team spirit between the support center and their support partners. So today we've just reviewed 5 of the top best practices that are, again, identified in the HDI Support Center standard. Training plans must be in place to prepare your staff to provide the very best service. Workforce management must be in place to improve utilization so that you can handle the expected volume and meet service levels. Knowledge management being in place improves your ability to handle more at the first level and on the first contact. Escalation procedures, well defined, will help you get customers the help they need more quickly. And finally, quality monitoring must be in place to ensure consistency. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is certainly not an all-inclusive list of the best practices for support centers. There are many best practices that support centers should be following. I promised you at the beginning that we would take a look at some of the average maturity ratings of other support centers in these 5 best practices. This graph shows 2 different bars. The blue bars represent the average maturity of clients who have achieved HDI Support Center certification. We would expect those clients to be at a higher maturity level as shown because they've taken the time to implement and or improve while they're preparing for passing the certification audit. The red bars represent the average maturity of clients who have engaged HDI to conduct a support center maturity assessment. And the assessment is designed to help them identify where there are gaps, what their current state is, and also to provide recommendations for them to close those gaps. So as you look at this chart, kind of take a look and see where you fall against these averages. We also mentioned at the beginning, and it's part of the title of today's presentation, how missing the mark can cost you. And it can cost you in a number of ways. Not having a training plan can cost you in a longer time to proficiency. Not doing workforce management can cost you in having an underutilized staff. Not having knowledge management can cost you in lower first contact resolutions. No escalation procedures costs you in longer resolution times. And quality monitoring not being in place can cost you in service quality. The bottom line is, and everybody's looking at this today, particularly in today's economy, is that not following best practices will cost you in a higher cost per incident. Implementing best practices at a high level enables you to service customers better through greater consistency, service customers quicker through reduced resolution time, and more often at the first level through first contact resolution. You'll also be able to fully utilize your staff through workforce management and enable your staff to be productive, efficient, and effective through training. I've referenced the HDI Support Center standard in this webcast, and I mentioned this at the beginning, but I'll mention it again. The standard was developed and is maintained by HDI International Certification Standards Committee. And these are some of the best minds in the industry. As an attendee of today's event, you're invited to download the HDI Support Center standard for free. Simply go to the URL shown. You'll just need to type in your email address and the password. And the password here is shown. It's all caps, and it's PATW. And if you're not a Gold or higher HDI member, you will need to have the special password to download this for free. Once you type in those two pieces of information, you'll just simply click download. So I encourage you to take a look at the standard, take a look at the 68 best practices identified in that, and find out where you are. I also mentioned early on when we talked about training plans that I would show you a template or a sample skills inventory gap analysis form. You'll need to take some time to develop a list of the skills, as well as the skill level required for each, that are necessary to provide the services that your support center provides. You'll also need to decide how you want to rank your staff in those skills levels. So you'll see the skills listed on the left-hand side. You'll see your analysts listed across the top, and then you can assess the skill levels of each analyst through either a self-assessment or a supervisor assessment, or even better, a combination of both. This is a template that you can build on as an example. I also want to take a moment to bring to your attention some HDI resources that relate specifically to a few of the best practices that I've talked about today. There's a great article on workforce optimization in the September-October 2008 issue of HDI Support World. With regard to knowledge management, I would encourage you to download and listen to a recent webcast done by Rick Joslin of HDI. Rick's widely recognized as an expert in knowledge management within the industry, and there's a lot of really great information in this webcast about best practices for knowledge management. I also want to call out the HDI Member Toolbox, which contains a number of great resources you can use. As I mentioned the Members Toolbox, I also have to mention that HDI membership is required to access that. So if you're not a member and you want to take advantage of the Member Toolbox, as well as the other benefits of HDI membership, I would encourage you to consider purchasing one. As an attendee of today's event, you can receive a 10% discount. Simply go to the URL shown. You can take a look at the different levels of memberships and select the one that best meets your need. When you click the Buy Now button, it'll take you to the checkout, where you just need to be sure to remember to enter the promo code PATW at checkout for that 10% discount. Finally, you can consider engaging HDI to help you discover the true strengths and weaknesses of your support center through HDI Support Center services. We offer varying levels of assessment and evaluation services to define the current state of the maturity of your support center and help you. We have 3 different services. The maturity assessment provides the greatest level of recommendations, and for those on a more limited budget, you might consider one of the evaluation services, either the best practices evaluation or the assisted evaluations. You can contact your HDI account manager, or you can contact me directly for more information on any of these services. This concludes today's 5 Critical Support Center Best Practices webcast. Thanks for attending. I hope you got something out of today's webcast that you can apply to help your support center. We'd love to hear your feedback about today's webcast. You can send it to me directly, or you can send it to HDI at either of the email addresses shown on this screen. Also on this screen are the links for the URL links for the HDI Support Center Standard download, the Knowledge Management webcast, and then the membership information that I mentioned. We'll leave this screen up while we take some questions and answers. If we don't get to your question, or if you'd like to schedule a time to talk with me in more detail, feel free to send me an email. Thanks again for attending. It's been my pleasure to offer this webcast today. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Allison now to manage the questions.
Great, Pat. Thank you for such great information. During your presentation, I have had some individuals submit some chat questions, and I'd like to walk through those. So I will read their questions on behalf of them and then let you answer. We've got a handful of them here, so we'll get through as many as we can with the time that's been allotted. And then again, for those of you, if we don't get your question answered here, then please feel free to email Pat directly, and she would be more than happy to engage with you on those questions. Pat, the first question that I have is, can you rank these 5 best practices in order of importance?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I'll give you the answer from my perspective, but it really does depend on the current state of maturity of your support center as well as your goals and objectives. I would start with training plans because it provides the foundation for enabling your support center analysts to do their work. You can give them knowledge management and escalation procedures, and you can monitor their quality. But if you don't train them up front, they won't be able to use any of those effectively and efficiently, and some of the other processes won't be quite as effective either. Second, I would choose knowledge management because you can enable greater first level and first contact resolution, which is what really most customers really want. After that, I would go with workforce management so that I can utilize my staff in the best way, then escalation procedures, and then finally quality monitoring, although it's certainly hard to say that one's more important than the other.
Great. Thanks, Pat. The next question that was presented, she asks, my organization has a 93% customer satisfaction rate consistently. That's awesome. How do we improve it, and is it possible to reach 100%?
Well, if you have a 93% customer satisfaction rating, you're doing something pretty well. I don't know that it's possible to reach 100% because human nature dictates that certain customers will never rate you at the highest level. If you're familiar with our customer competency levels, you know about the consciously competent customer who's quite technically savvy, and oftentimes that type of customer, even when really happy with the resolution, always sees room for improvement and simply will not rate you at 100%. To improve the overall rating, take a look at the rating for individual questions in your survey and pay attention to the comments in the surveys from your customers about what they aren't happy with. And then identify what you can do to improve in those areas, and you should see a corresponding increase in the overall satisfaction rating. Look at other metrics too, such as abandon rate and first contact resolution. Improving performance in those areas will often increase your customer satisfaction as well.
Great, thanks, Pat. The next question, what would you rate as a good percentage for first contact resolution?
Oh, another great question. Well, your target for first contact resolution needs to be appropriate for your environment. From my perspective, 75% is a good number to shoot for. However, you may have to handle a lot of calls that your group doesn't have access rights to resolve, for instance, so you may only be able to achieve 60% in your organization. If your group is highly technical and has access to most systems, you may resolve upwards of 90%. So from the low end to the high end, in the middle, 75% is a pretty good number.
Okay. I know this is a question that I see come through our customers quite often. This person asks, what is an average ratio of support center personnel to customers?
Well, you're right, Allison. That is a question that gets asked a lot. And the ratio varies widely across industries. We often see an average of one frontline support analyst for every 200 to 250 end users. However, that can be lower or higher depending on the industry, the customer served, and the services offered. And it will often be higher number of customers per analyst in certain industries, for instance, manufacturing, healthcare, where you have a lot of end customers who don't use technology all the time. So again, it does vary widely across industries.
Okay, great. Next question. What is the best way to determine the cost per incident?
Well, the best way is to divide the number of incidents into your total support center budget. Now, I would suggest doing that for both the contacts you receive as well as the incidents that you log, because those costs will be different. Within the members toolbox, we do have a cost itemization worksheet that you might want to take a look at.
Okay. The next question, she states that our call center receives calls on problems and requests. Should there be a different goal for FCR versus requests versus problems?
Well, typically, yes. Again, your targets need to be appropriate for your environment, but a lot of service requests may not, for instance, be handled by the support center and simply can't be handled on first contact because they have to go through approvals or go to a different group to be handled. So you certainly could define a different target for incidents versus requests.
Okay. It seems as we keep answering these questions, more and more questions keep filing in. So I'm going to go through a few more. We'll get through what we can. And then, again, as I stated earlier, if we don't make it to your question, please feel free to email Pat directly. The next question is, where can I find phone etiquette training?
Well, there are 2 HDI courses that cover phone etiquette as well as additional essential skills for support center analysts. The HDI the HDI Customer Service Representative course and the HDI Support Center Analyst course. Both of those courses are offered via public classes, on-site classes, and online. And students can achieve HDI certification upon successfully completing and passing the exam. So if you're training a large number of people over time, you might also consider having someone in your organization become an HDI certified instructor, which would enable that person to deliver those courses internally. Because HDI is vendor neutral, we don't endorse or recommend specific vendors. However, there are vendors out there who do provide phone etiquette training only. And again, since we don't recommend specific vendors, I would have to suggest at this point that you Google that. You'll probably come up with one of the most popular ones. Most of those vendors offer either DVD-based training or on-site training workshops. And I've worked with clients who have used again, some of those DVD-based trainings and have good things to say about it.
Okay, great. This is an appropriate question. With the economy as bad as it is, how do we sell the value of the process to management?
Well, I'm not sure you can sell the value of the process. What you're going to have to sell is the value of the benefits of implementing or improving the process. And in light of today's economy, you're going to most likely have to forecast either some sort of cost savings or cost avoidance. If you've budgeted to hire an analyst, by implementing some sort of a process, can you avoid that cost? Can you handle more customers that you might be expecting through an acquisition or some other sort of increase to your customer base through, again, implementing some sort of process or improving in some area? So, again, you really aren't going to sell the process, but rather the benefits of it. And to do that, you're going to have to do some forecasting.
Okay, very good. I've just got 2 more questions that we're going to answer, and then we'll have to put it to a close. Again, as a reminder, if we did not make it to your question, please feel free to email Pat directly. That email is palbright@thinkhdi.com, and I know she had it in the presentation as well. The next question, how do you accomplish these things with a limited budget and resources?
Well, unfortunately, you can't accomplish everything with limited budget and resources. So in this case, I would encourage you to identify the best practices that have the most value for your environment. Think of a Pareto chart, and work on improving your performance in those areas. Work on things that will provide the maximum value and the maximum effectiveness and efficiency gains.
All right, very good. And then our last question. We try to improve the first call resolution, but also some feedback saying once they were transferred to the Tier 2 support, the problem was solved immediately. So why not transfer them in the first place? What should we do in this situation?
Well, there are many possible answers, and those would depend on answers to some additional questions. But, for instance, when the incidents are resolved by Tier 2, do you have a knowledge management process in place to build knowledge, which will then enable your Tier 1 to resolve similar incidents in the future, and perhaps even publish self-service knowledge for customers? If this is the case, you could market and promote how your support model builds knowledge, which enables the support center to provide greater consistency in service, resolve more incidents at Tier 1, and provide knowledge directly to customers through self-service. So when you get that feedback and you get people requesting, why can't I be transferred to Tier 2, one of the things they're really asking is, why can't I just get an answer quicker? And you need to help them understand how your support model enables that overall for them.
All right, very good. Well, Pat, I think for the sake of time, we're going to have to end the webinar at this point. There are a number of questions that are still in the chat queue, which Pat will try to get back with you as soon as she can. Again, her email is on the screen. Feel free to email her directly, and she will get back with you regarding your questions. Also, she listed all of the resources that are available on the screen. I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to participate in the webinar, and I want to thank Pat as well for her valuable insight and guidance on this subject matter. At this point, we will end the webinar, and it will be archived on the HDI website, and we will email you a link to that as well. So again, thank you, and thank you, Pat.
Well, you're welcome. We had a large group today, so clearly best practices are in the minds of many. Again, thanks everybody for attending.